Hi everybody, it's Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au bringing you my regular weekly feature, The War on Media Misinformation. And today I want to address the issue of property taxes and housing affordability, because the two subjects are intricately linked. Media tends to attribute housing affordability problems to the impacts of foreign investors as buyers and also to the impacts of Australian property investors, particularly negatively geared ones, according to the general media rhetoric. But what we believe to be true from the research that we do into the housing industry is that the real cause, the prime cause of problems with housing affordability is the cost of new dwellings. And it's a cost that's greatly inflated by the taxes, fees and charges imposed on the building industry by various levels of government, all three levels of government. There was some news out in the last week which shows just how high those taxes and fees and charges have become. They've hit record levels. In financial year 2018, property taxes imposed at the various levels of government reached a record $30.3 billion. 5 years ago it was around 20 billion, so in the last 5 years it's risen from around 20 billion to 30 billion, and it just keeps getting higher because state governments in particular keep coming up with new imposts to raise revenue for various projects or programs that they want to run, and they tend to regard the housing industry as a very convenient cash cow, as do all three levels of government. It's actual local government that has the greatest take of that $30 billion, according to figures from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Last financial year, of the $30 billion in taxes raised from the housing industry, 18 billion were raised by local government with things like rates and various fees and charges, infrastructure charges imposed on builders, for example, and 12 billion went to state government through taxes such as stamp duty and land tax. The federal government also has a take as well through imposts such as capital gains tax. So it's a pretty big lump. The thing is, it keeps getting worse, and this is the nub of the housing affordability issue. Now, the cost of creating new dwellings in this country is unnecessarily high. It's ridiculously high, and the reason why it's so high is because of these imposts of taxes. As I said, all three levels of government use the building industry, the housing industry, as a very convenient cash cow, and the way they represented it is imposts on developers who are generally characterised as rich and greedy bastards ripping off the system. So who cares if there are more imposts lumped on them? But in actual fact, it's the first home buyers who, the end users of the products that they create, who are the people who ultimately pay the price, because these imposts just add to the cost of creating new dwellings, and that's reflected in the price they charge. You basically can't charge $300,000 for a new house and land package if it costs $400,000 to create it. And the reason why it costs so much is because of these imposts. We had an example just in the last few days where the state government in Queensland, and this is a typical example, they come along every week, feel they need to raise some more revenue. One of the stated reasons why they want to raise some more revenue for the Queensland state government is to fund suicide prevention programs, and they're obviously a very worthy cause for a government program, but they have decided to fund this by imposing higher levies on the building industry in Queensland. They're going to reintroduce a flat levy rate for all construction projects in Queensland to fund various programs, including the suicide prevention one, according to reports. But this is just yet another higher impost of taxes, fees and charges imposed on the home building industry by a government, and that's just added to the cost of creating new dwellings. And every time there's a state budget handed down by a state or territory government, it invariably includes new imposts on the housing industry. It's just considered by politicians to be fair game. So they keep adding to the costs of what they do, therefore the price of their product rises. And the problem is that first home buyers, if they want to get a grant to buy their first home from a state government, they have to buy or build a new home. You can't get a grant for buying an existing property. Existing properties are generally cheaper and better located than the new ones, which tend to be out on the fringes, where people don't necessarily want to live. But if they want to have a leg up from a state government grant, they have to buy or build new. The problem is new is really expensive, and so it's for the first home buyer, it's kind of a case of 6 of one or half a dozen of the other. They get a grant if they buy or build new, but they have to pay a higher price as a general statement. And the reason why the new product is so much more expensive in many cases than the existing comparable product is because of these imposts from the various levels of government. We indeed had some comments made just in the last few days by the national firm of valuers, property valuers, Heron Todd White, and they produce a very good report every month called the Month in Review. It's a national report contributed to by their offices right around the country. And what they were commenting on in Brisbane was that they were saying that building a new home may not be as economical as purchasing an existing property. In most cases, we've found building contracts have become more expensive over the last 12 months. Yeah, they have for various reasons, but including the never-ending imposition of new taxes and fees charges by state governments and local governments, not just in Queensland, but everywhere else. It found that there was serious competition between new and established stock within some housing estates, with some existing properties, that's the older ones, trading for up to prices of up to $40,000 less than the new ones. And this is the problem that faced by first home buyers and other buyers, that they can get an existing comparable property quite often cheaper than the new ones, and quite often a lot cheaper. But this is the reason why, because governments like the state government of Queensland keep lumping new costs on the industry, and it's really unhelpful, and it's the cause of the housing affordability problem. And rather ironically, and rather disappointingly, the politicians are very good at pointing the finger of blame for housing affordability problems at others, like property investors or foreign investors, knowing full well that they're the number of the problem themselves. But that's what politicians do. They're not renowned for their honesty or integrity. So in my view, that's the whole nub of the housing affordability problem in a nutshell. Politicians keep lumping new costs on the industry that creates new dwellings, and the people who ultimately pay the price are first home buyers, and it's higher than it needs to be. Be interested to know what you think about that. Let me know your views. Please write your comments on the Facebook page if you have some feedback or some comments you'd like to make. That's it for now. That's this week's edition of The War on Misinformation. Let's do it again same time next week. Bye for now.